The New York Times, and just about seemingly every other literary society, says that Ulysses by James Joyce is the greatest novel ever written. Which is interesting, because Ulysses is so tedious and confusing as to be virtually unreadable. Unless you happen to have one of the literally thousands of companion guides to walk you through sentence by sentence because of how confusing and tedious it is. Even academics find the book mind-numbingly boring, which apparently is the whole point. Because Joyce wrote Ulysses in part as a response to the exaggerated romanticism of the day, where stories and books bore no resemblance to real life. The heroes in stories were intelligent, strong, beautiful people who experienced larger-than-life events and adventures. They were presented as perfect, or at least near perfect individuals, and our lives seem to be very boring and mundane in comparison. Joyce sets to instead champion the boring and the mundane, and to demonstrate the heroism often necessary to endure everyday life. For example, in one chapter, in page after tedious page after tedious page, he details the hero, or really anti-hero, a guy named Leopold Bloom, cooking a runny, bloody mutton kidney. And there's only so much of that you can take. And it really gives you this insight into this life, really this terrible life that this man is living. Leo Bloom, the anti-hero, is disrespected, dismissed, and ignored. In fact, he repels most people because the kidneys, gizzards, and organs that he's so fond of consuming gives his breath a faint hint of urine. He lost his only child years before, so he doesn't have any children. He's terrible at his job. Nobody respects him. Nobody takes him seriously. His wife is cheating on him, doesn't love him. In fact, he knows that his wife is cheating on him, and she knows that he knows that she is cheating on him, and she doesn't even care. His life is sad and empty. His life is tragic. Again, Joyce is trying to demonstrate the heroism necessary to endure such a life without meaning, value, or love. And of course, Leo Bloom's life is tragic. It is sad because not because he's not handsome or strong or intelligent and successful, but his life is sad and tragic because his life is empty. And at some level, he's cognizant of this. He is aware of the emptiness of his life, and he dares to try to probe the depths of that which we all fear, what we all dread, and that is the emptiness of our lives. Because we all want something more than that. You know, we think to ourselves, man, if I ever become like Leo Bloom, God help me. Because that's not what we want. We desire value in our lives. We want our lives to matter. We want them to be significant. We want our lives to have a sense of richness about them. And as we talked about last week, we want that sense of well-being. We want to live a life, or to have a life that is worth living. And into this place, into this need, into this desire, into this universal hunger that we all have for existential purpose and meaning in our lives, God speaks Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. A little bit of recap here. Just take a moment. The Lord is saying, I know the way. I know the way to that well-being that you're looking for, but you need to allow me to take you there. I can give you that which you long for in your heart and soul, but you have to allow me to be your guide. I can show you a life worth living, but I have to be your shepherd. And then the Lord begins to break it down through the voice of David, the consummate shepherd, really. And using this imagery and this analogy and this metaphor, he begins to paint this picture of the care and nurture of the Lord. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And the reason that we shall not want, the reason that we lack for nothing, spiritually speaking, the reason why our souls are full, the reason why we have meaning and significance and value is not necessarily because we have a shepherd, because there's many shepherds out there. There are many things and many causes and many purposes that people follow in their lives. It's not because we have a shepherd. It is because of who our shepherd is. The Lord is my shepherd. That's why we shall not want. And so David is bragging on how awesome it is for the Lord to be his shepherd. He's bragging on the Lord as a shepherd. I think before we move on from this sentence, it's also important for us to point out that Jesus says that I am the good shepherd and repeatedly refers to himself as a shepherd and to us as his sheep. And I personally believe that it's a direct reference to Psalm 23. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Last week we talked about how sheep will not lie down unless 4 conditions are met. Number 1, they are free from fear. They are free from tension. They are free from fleas and flies and parasites. And number 4, they are free from hunger. And so for a sheep to lie down, it must feel safe and satisfied and content and happy. And this is the description of the kind of shepherd that the Lord is, the kind of care and nurture that he offers to us. He desires sheep that feel safe and satisfied and healthy and content and happy. And that's the goal that he's working towards in our lives. And of course, that's as far as we got last week as we're going through the 23rd Psalm. And so, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. This is one of those instances where I believe the King James actually gets it a little better than maybe some of the more modern translations. And those of you who know it, it is the still waters. And all animals need water. They have to have it. We all need it to survive, sheep included. But sheep are very temperamental about water. They're temperamental about a lot of things. They're kind of skittish creatures anyway. But for whatever reason, sheep will not drink from noisy, turbulent waters. And so for a sheep to drink, it really needs more of a pond. It needs still waters. It needs a well or maybe a very slow-moving stream. And the picture here is of a shepherd who understands his sheep. He understands the needs of the sheep. He understands what they fear. He understands what their issues are. This is a person who's listening to the sheep in a sense, who cares about the sheep and the way that sheep do things. And so this is a shepherd that goes through great lengths to ensure not only that his sheep always have access to water which they need to live, but that they have access to still waters. That they have access to quiet waters, because that's the way that sheep drink best. That is what makes the sheep feel safe. That's what makes the sheep feel secure. That's how the sheep prefer to drink water. And so what does all of this have to do with Leo Bloom and Ulysses and the lyrics of Eleanor Rigby, which I read last week, and this idea of well-being and content? And I personally believe that there is a huge connection here, and the connection is important. And it's the idea that we all want good lives. We want our lives to matter. We want them, again, to have been worth living. However, when our lives lack meaning and significance and love, we have this tendency to feel empty and alone. And we think to ourselves, sometimes very naturally, it just comes. We don't even mean to think this, but it just comes upon us and we think, man, nobody cares. Nobody cares about me and my problems. Nobody cares about my troubles. Nobody cares about my feelings. Nobody cares what I think about anything, or my ideas, or my desires, or my needs. Nobody really cares about me. And when we feel that way, and when that happens, there is this futility and fatalism to life that begins to kind of encroach upon us and upon our souls. And before we know it, in our own minds, we are Leo Bloom. We are Eleanor Rigby. We are Father Mackenzie. Nobody cares about me. Woe is me. I'm alone. Life is empty. Life is futile. And this is what we're afraid of. This is what we fear in life. This is what we want to avoid. We don't want to live that life. We want to live a different life. We want to live a life that, again, that has value and significance and meaning. We want to feel peace and contentment. We want to feel that our lives are rich. And again, that our lives are worth living. And the bottom line is that, fundamentally speaking, such things tend to be the product of our relationships. Life seems richer, life seems more significant, life seems to have more value when we think to ourselves and we know in our hearts, hey, I know that people care about me. Somebody listens to me. Somebody understands me. Somebody wants good for me. Somebody has my back. Somebody loves me. These are the most base and fundamental and primal needs of our hearts and our souls. And when those needs are met, we feel like we matter, because we matter to someone. And because we matter to someone, we feel a sense of value and significance. And what's going on here is the Lord is saying that you are important to me, that there is somebody who cares about you. There is somebody who loves you. You matter to someone because you matter to me. That I listen. I understand. I have your back. I love you more than you will ever know. And the idea that the living and eternal God cares about you ought to make all the difference in the world. Because now we're not alone. How can life possibly be empty? How can life possibly be futile? The living and eternal God cares about me and loves me and listens and understands and is my shepherd. How can that not add a tremendous sense of value and significance to my life? And that's the kind of shepherd that He is. He leads us beside still waters. Not just besides any waters, not the noisy and turbulent waters that kind of spook us and make us afraid. He understands us and understands who we are and leads us where we need to go. What an incredible picture, again, of the nurture and care of the Lord and how He deals with us, His people. He restores my soul. So He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. This is an image I'm not sure we get unless we understand David and what it means to be a shepherd and what shepherds have to go through. There's an old English shepherding term called a cast sheep. And a cast sheep is when a sheep has slipped or fallen or somehow lost its feet and rolled over onto its back and cannot right itself. And what sheep will have a tendency to do when they're cast is they will just kind of frantically kind of flail their feet in an attempt to try and turn themselves over. But there's something about sheep and how they're weighted and how they're balanced where that really doesn't do any good. And sometimes the sheep will just sit there and bleat for a while, and then if no one hears it, it'll just give up and maybe kick a little bit. And if it hears something, maybe then it'll kick a little bit more like, hey, come notice me. I'm cast, I've fallen, and I can't get up. And I didn't really mean it like that, but that's kind of where the sheep is. And that's why shepherds count their sheep. Not just to make sure that no sheep have wandered off and to make sure that all the sheep are there, they're just going through. They're wanting to make sure all the sheep are upright. That they're not only present, but that they're upright. They want to see the sheep's heads. And oftentimes when one of the sheep is missing, it's not necessarily because the sheep has wandered off. It's that somewhere along the way, the sheep has been cast, and so the shepherd has to retrace his steps and go back to try and find the sheep that has rolled over on its back and cannot right itself. A lot of people believe that this is what's going on in the parable of the lost sheep, where the shepherd leaves the 99 to go and to find the one. But regardless, shepherds have been known to search for their cast sheep for hours, because time is of the essence. If a cast sheep does not right itself in time, it could die or it can become seriously injured or sick, which will ultimately, again, lead to its death. And when a shepherd finds a cast sheep, there's a process that the shepherd goes through to restore the sheep. You see, he just doesn't pick it up and turn it upright after it's been on its back for an hour or so. There's this whole routine that he has to go through. So the first thing that he does is he rolls the sheep over onto its side. And then he massages the legs to try and get the circulation going back into the legs. And he works the legs and he kind of gets them going. And then he very gently picks the sheep up and sets it on its feet. And he stands over the sheep to ensure that the sheep doesn't fall. Because at first the sheep is going to stagger. And it's going to stumble because it doesn't have its legs yet. And so he kind of stands there making sure that the sheep doesn't fall. And it takes a couple of minutes for the sheep really to get its legs. And then the shepherd begins to walk slowly back to the rest of the flock at the pace in which the sheep can endure. And by the time he gets back to the flock, the sheep is usually pretty much back to its old self. And that's what it means to restore a sheep. Most scholars believe this is exactly the reference that David is making here. Because David had to restore many sheep in his day, except in this case, he is relating this to us. Because the Lord is our shepherd, and he restores my soul. And the truth of the matter is that as the sheep of the Lord, we do look to Him, we do love Him, we do want to follow Him, but sometimes we get cast, don't we? Sometimes we lose our way, sometimes, we fall down. And we're the one who are just lying there, frantically flailing around, trying to get our bearings in life, trying to get right side up. And no matter what we do, we just can't seem to do it. And we cry out for help. We bleed all around us, and none of the other sheep can do anything about it. And so we're helpless. We're impotent. We're desperate. We know that if we stay in this position for much longer, it's not going to go well for us. That there's some bad things that can happen. And in those times, those who are the sheep of the Lord, those who follow the shepherd will search for us. And He will look for us. And when He finds us, He restores our souls. He is gentle with us, not dealing harshly with judgment and wrath and all of that stuff. He deals with us with mercy and grace and compassion and forgiveness, and He restores us and gives us what we need to get back on our feet and to get moving back in the direction that we need to be. And again, it's a wonderful picture of the care and the nurture of the Lord, which really is what this psalm is about. He leads me or makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters. He restores my souls. These are all pictures of that care and that nurture. And the idea that the Lord's flock, that the Lord's sheep are happy and content. And I kind of stop here because I can be a cynical person, and I think, well, is that true? Are those who follow the Lord and those who follow the Lord in this way, are they really more content? Do they really, have more peace in their life? Do they have a more of a sense of significance and value than really the rest of the population at large? Because I know in my life, I believe that's true. That I have a much deeper sense of peace and contentment and meaning and value and significance. In fact, certainly much more so than before I was a believer. And I came to Christ as an adult, so I remember what it was like not to have Christ. And it's night and day. In fact, I bet if we took a poll in here and asked how many of you feel that you have a greater sense of significance and value and meaning and a richer sense of life since coming to the Lord, that you likewise would raise your hands. But does this prove out statistically over the larger arching society and community? And I believe that it does. In fact, there have been some studies along these effects that don't necessarily ask this question, but they do answer this question. The largest of which was done by the Austin Institute for Religion and Culture, and they studied 15,738 Americans, which is an interesting number because it's about 15 times the amount of participants to receive statistical accuracy. We're in the season of the presidency and all the political stuff that's going on because we'll be electing a president this year. And so there's lots of polls, and you'll notice that they all say plus or minus 2%, right? Everything's plus or minus 2%. That's because they surveyed 1,028 people, because that is the amount of people that you need to get a plus or minus 2% standard deviation for the accuracy. And so what this study does is it amps that up by 15 times. It's actually not 15 times more accurate. It's actually an exponential number from that. So it's exponentially to the 15th power more accurate. And here's what they found. That 45% of people who attend religious services weekly in America, this study was done in America, and so I would assume these would be mostly Christians. That 45% of people in America who attend religious services weekly would describe themselves as very happy. Now, this was part of a much larger study, so it wasn't like they were going just after this one. 33% of people who occasionally attend religious services would describe themselves as very happy. And 28% of people who seldom attend religious services would describe themselves as very happy. In other words, people who regularly attend religious services, which we would take to be more committed Christians, almost twice as many would describe themselves as very happy or experiencing this kind of life as those people who really don't give God much thought or follow the Lord in their lives. Furthermore, what it found was those who attend religious services regularly on a weekly basis also handled the pressures and troubles of life far more effectively. They were had a much easier time navigating the loss of a job, the loss of a family member, the loss of a marriage, and things like that. And so what we see is that, yes, I guess if someone were so inclined to try and measure such things, that yes, those people who follow the Lord do seem to experience peace and contentment and happiness at a greater level than those in the general population, which I found very, very interesting, because it really is kind of the thesis of the psalm, or the theme of the psalm. And so we read on. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Now, this is a very big and powerful idea for me. And it's one that I think we can connect a lot of dots and have a tremendous amount of insight for us. First of all, there's this idea that the Lord is guiding us, that he's moving us in a direction. There's intention to it. That he is leading us. And where is he leading us? He is leading us in paths of righteousness. Now, if you've attended our church at all, you would know, because I talk about it all the time whenever the term is mentioned, the term righteousness means right relationships. And in this context, it is probably more of the idea that he guides us to do what is right. He guides us towards what is good and healthy and noble and honorable in our dealings with the Lord and with others, that he leads us to do those things that are right. In other words, that Christians live in a way, or those who are the sheep of the Lord live in such a way as to live righteous lives and to be a blessing to others, and then they themselves, and we'll get to this, are in turn blessed by the Lord and by others. And what this line is really talking about, and we'll drill into this and see how and why this is so, is it's actually describing that which we desire in life. And we've talked about it this week with the Ulysses stuff, and last week quite a bit about those existential needs, again, for meaning and richness and blessing that we all have. There's a term in the Old Testament that I really like. It's the term shalom, which means peace, right? And the Jewish people would use shalom as a greeting and as a farewell. And we know shalom as to mean peace, but it meant a lot more to them. Shalom to them meant peace multiplied by prosperity, multiplied by blessing, multiplied by love, multiplied by goodness, multiplied by mercy, and so on and so forth. It was wishing that rich, full life on someone else as we greet them. We're wishing that peace in more of an existential, more of a comprehensive sense in their lives. It's very powerful. And this is what we want from life. And, we want that meaning. We want that life worth living. And I believe that's what this text is talking about. Because the phrasing here is very interesting. Not only does he guide us in paths of righteousness, but he has a stake in our happiness and well-being, that he leads us to do what is good and right and honorable and noble for his name's sake. In other words, he desires that we experience such things as much as we desire to experience such things. That he desires what is good for his sheep. That he considers our peace and our joy to be a reflection upon his reputation, upon his character, upon his personhood. For example, David the shepherd was very proud of his sheep, I'm sure. If you're a shepherd and you have all these sheep in your charge, and the sheep are well fed and they're healthy and they're well groomed and they feel safe and secure, and other shepherds can tell these sorts of things. If some other shepherd came by and they saw the condition of your sheep, David would puff out his chest a little bit and say, yeah, my sheep are very well cared for. My sheep are doing great. My sheep have this tremendous sense of well-being. And that's really the idea that we see here in this particular concept, or in this context, that he guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And we see this idea biblically begin to take shape as we begin to explore the concept of righteousness and its antonym, wickedness. And we begin to explore and to contrast the fruits of righteousness with the fruits of wickedness. And so this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying that what this line is referring to is that existential peace and well-being that we all desire in life, because these are the fruits of righteousness. Righteousness takes us to this place where we all want to go, and the Lord is intentionally leading us in this direction. For example, in Psalm 37, we read, "The righteous are never forsaken." In Psalm 92, "The righteous flourish." In Psalm 97, "The righteous are a light and joy." In Proverbs 10, the righteous experience prosperity. Proverbs 10, the righteous are a blessing to others. Proverbs 10, the righteous experience joy. Proverbs 11, the righteous have the goodwill of others. Proverbs 13, the righteous receive prosperity. Psalm 34, the righteous know justice and vindication. Psalm 37, the righteous are wise. Psalm 112, the righteous know hope. Proverbs 4, the righteous know paths of light. Proverbs 10, the righteous know many blessings. And on it goes. There are actually hundreds of statements, declarative statements in the Scripture that talk about the fruit of the righteous, and it describes this incredibly rich, deep, and meaningful life that is filled with value and love and significance. And what he's saying is, and what the text says, as you read the text and as you do a study on this concept of righteousness, is that righteousness leads us to a very good place. Righteousness leads us to this place of fulfillment and meaning. And now we have this line in Psalm 23. He guides me in paths of righteousness. He's leading me to the good places. He's leading me to the good life. He's leading me to a sense of well-being. Why? For His name's sake. That it reflects upon Him as a shepherd the quality of His sheep. And so not only do we desire that well-being and contentment and peace and fulfillment in our lives, the Lord desires these things for us as well. And the opposite is also true. When you start looking at the wicked and the fruit of the wicked. Psalm 1, the wicked are like chaff, the wind blows away. Psalm 1, the wicked will perish. Psalm 5, the wicked cannot dwell in the presence of God. Psalm 7, the wicked invite violence. Psalm 141, the wicked ensnare themselves. Psalm 146, the wicked experience frustration. Proverbs 3, the wicked experience ruin. Proverbs 4, the wicked stumble in darkness. Proverbs 10, the name of the wicked will rot. And again, on it goes with dozens, if not hundreds, of references towards the wicked, and we've all seen them as we've read the Scriptures. And so the Bible provides this very poignant and very graphic picture of both the wicked and the righteous. The righteous are seen as living healthy, peaceful, contented lives, and the wicked are pictured as living contentious and frustrated and broken lives. And this is a very intuitive idea when we really begin to understand righteousness and what it's all about, especially the fruits of righteousness and how righteousness plays out in our lives. But the bottom line is that God considers it a matter of honor to lead us towards a sense of health and well-being. He considers it as part of His character and part of what He desires for us. And again, this is a very intuitive concept, and we see it play out in our society all the time. For example, when rookies come into the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, and even Major League Baseball, they have to endure all sorts of seminars and events and little classes and conferences on basic life skills and how to make wise choices. This is well documented. They are taught how to handle money, how to deal with opportunistic friends and family, how to speak to the media, how to relate to social media. Obviously, some of them aren't paying attention. How to serve in the community, how to relate to women, how to avoid compromising situations, how to handle yourself in public, how to speak during an interview, which is why they all say the exact same things. And these organizations spend a lot of energy and a lot of effort trying to help these young men make wise choices and get off in the right direction in life. And you would hope to think, and you would like to think, it's because they genuinely care about them and they want them to succeed. But the bottom line is that these young men, one way or another, are a reflection upon the organizations they represent. They represent not only the team, but they represent the league. And so a young man who is happy and healthy and well-adjusted and serving in his community and doing community service and building people up and saying all of the right things, that's a young man that reflects very well on his organization and on the league. And those are the players that tend to be kind of championed and highlighted. And those are the ones that the league likes to focus on because they're doing everything right. And because they, most of all, reflect well on the league. But occasionally there's a young man who doesn't get it, who's not paying attention when the ex-players come through and talk about their stories and try to help them with these types of things. And you have some young men who are making, poor choices and getting into trouble and making mistakes. And the league doesn't like that because it reflects very negatively on the team and on the league. And I have to confess that as a fan, I fall prey to that sort of thing all the time. That there are players that I know about, I know their backstory, teams, I know their backstory, I know how they operate, and I like it. And I want to root for those teams. People have asked me this week, of the 4 teams left, in the playoffs, in the National Football League, who do you want to win? And I've been telling people I want to see the Arizona Cardinals win, even though they're a rival of my primary team. And that's because I know the backstory of Larry Fitzgerald, who apparently is a wonderful guy. A very interesting guy who serves his community and does well, and he's played in the league all of these years and has never won a ring, and I would really like to see him get over the top. So I'm rooting for the Arizona Cardinals, pretty much following this idea here. And there are teams who will remain nameless that I'm not rooting for because I know some of the history and I know some of the background and I really don't want to see them do well. And the bottom line is really that we reflect one way or another on that and the things that we're associated with. And again, I believe the Lord considers it a matter of honor. For us to be well cared for us to be happy, content, and satisfied. He guides us in paths of righteousness. He leads us to the good places for His name's sake. Our well-being is personal for God. What an incredible concept that is. Just think of the depth of that. That God so desires for you to experience the well-being and the existential meaning and purpose and happiness and peace and contentment that He has made it personal. That's what He desires for you. But if you think about it, that's what good shepherds do, right? Like if you're a good shepherd and one of your sheep decides that he or she doesn't want to go along with the program and wants to run away all the time and roll around in the mud and has fleas and mites and flies and all of that other stuff, and this sheep shows up and you're around some other shepherds and they see that sheep, you're like really apologetic and defensive. Oh man, I can't do anything with this one. But please look at my other sheep. This is how they are. I mean, this is a very natural response. And the Lord, likewise, as a shepherd, desires his sheep to be satisfied and content. I'll close with this, and we'll pick up the Psalm 23 narrative here, pick up the Psalm next week with, I think, some of the most powerful parts of the Psalm. And not that this isn't incredibly powerful, because to me it is. It's so powerful to me that the living, eternal, omnipotent, omniscient, sovereign creator God of the universe cares for us. Cares for us so much to even describe himself in this way. And I'll be honest with you, we go back to the statistic that I referred to earlier from the Austin Institute. And I'm actually shocked. I'm actually surprised that 45% number isn't higher. That it isn't much higher, to be honest with you. I'm actually flabbergasted. Because the Lord is our shepherd. The Lord. Our Creator, the one who knows us intimately. The one who is infinitely capable and wonderful and beautiful and loving and good and desires to take us to those places and those great places of righteousness and fruitfulness and meaning and significance. He desires to move us away from that whole Leo Bloom, all that existential garbage that our society tends to want to put on us and place on us and make us carry. It seems to me that number should be like 85, 90%, because the Lord is our shepherd. He makes us lie down in green pastures. He leads us beside quiet waters. He restores our soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake, and he is infinitely capable in doing all of those things. And so it absolutely blows my mind that only 45% say that they're very happy. And then I thought about it. And I realized that while there are a lot of people in America who claim Christianity, who claim to follow the Lord, that there's a lot of people who have good intentions, but frankly, the Lord isn't their shepherd. They're following other things, other ideas, other pursuits. They're following their own heart in directions that move them in opposite purposes to where the Lord is trying to lead them. He's trying to guide us down paths of righteousness. And there's a lot of people who even claim to be Christian, and maybe even they are, but they're not walking on the paths of righteousness. God's trying to lead us in paths of righteousness to do what is right and good and honorable and true. But for whatever reason, again, usually our own hearts, the world likewise is a very deceptive entity and will lead us in a lot of different directions. And as we begin to move in those directions, we move ourselves away from the well-being and the contentedness and the peace and the meaning and the significance that God desires for our lives. And as we move away from the paths of righteousness and begin to travel these other paths, I think it's then that we begin to experience some of that emptiness and some of that loneliness and some of that futility. And we never think it's going to end up that way. We never think that's where the path is going to lead, or we wouldn't go down that path. But again, the world is deceptive and tricky, and it will lie to us, and it will tell us all kinds of things. And yeah, you don't really want to go down this righteous path. Oh, that's a bunch of goody two-shoes nonsense. That's just a bunch of pie in the sky. You don't really need to be all sold out, to be a Christian, or you really don't need to live it. Just believe and then live however you want to. And what they're not telling you is that it doesn't lead to some very good places. And so I think one of the lessons that we learn from Psalm 23, and one of the lessons that's so important, is that the Lord is an incredible shepherd. And He so desires for us to experience that spiritual, that existential peace and contentment that we so crave, that we so desire in life. And He wants to take us there, and He wants to lead us there. And He's so good at it, and He will if you let Him, but you have to let Him. You have to follow Him. Follow the shepherd. Walk the paths of righteousness. Not that we're not going to make mistakes, not that we're not going to fall, and we know that when we fall, what? We're cast, right? And He'll come and He'll find us and He'll restore us and He'll pick us back up. And so my challenge for you today, as we look at this incredible psalm, and it's so wonderful, and my temptation was only spending 3 weeks on it and not 10. And you guys know how I am, so count yourselves very, very fortunate. But as we look at it, it's such a beautiful, wonderful picture of love and care and nurture. And we just see the heart of God and God's heart towards us. It's just like your children, right? You want to do all these kinds of things for your children. You want them to be blessed. You want them to be well, content and to find peace and meaning and all of those things. And the Lord's not just our shepherd, He's our Father. And He desires those things for our lives. And my challenge is if you're really struggling with that, and again, I'm not talking about necessarily happiness, and I know that survey did happiness, and I kind of struggle even using that a little bit because happiness is circumstantial and short-lived and based on kind of what's going on in your life right now. Joy is a deep spiritual reality that has a whole lot more to do with our relationship with God and truths that we know and we bank on with faith and holding to the promises of God. But the challenge today is that if you're struggling, and again, let's throw happiness off the table. Because stuff happens, and even Christians who are following the Lord can't be happy about it. But if you're struggling with that deep inner joy, that deep inner hope, that sense of purpose and significance and value, the idea that my life matters or my life doesn't matter, if you're struggling with that idea that I don't sense well-being in my life, I don't even know if my life's worth living right now in the way that I'm living it. It just seems to be like everybody else, and that it's going nowhere. And I feel empty. I feel somewhat alone. Then I want to challenge you to seek out the shepherd, to seek the good shepherd, because He can take you there. He knows the way, and He will take you to that place.